Hey YouTube, so today, this is going to be a shorter stream than my usual ones. I just thought I wanted to get a video out there talking about DDR5 RAM specifically because I did look at my videos that I uploaded last year for both the AM5 platform as well as the Intel Z790 platform, and this kind of applies to Z690 as well. But for what we're going to talk about today, it's all going to be about DDR5. So what you need to know if you are thinking about upgrading to a newer platform either soon or this year or in the near future, what you need to know when it comes to DDR5, what's different about it compared to DDR4, or even if you're on DDR3 today and you're thinking about upgrading to the next generation, what that looks like. So this is the spec sheet for, we're looking at the Ryzen 5 7600X. I do have the 5600X, which is a DDR4 based CPU for comparison. We're going to look at some of the specs in terms of what is officially supported from the manufacturer, so in this case AMD. And then we're also going to look at Intel as well, because there are some key differences here. So Intel does have two CPU generations that support DDR5. So one of them is the 12th generation, which is Alder Lake. That launched in Q4 of 2021, so that is over a year old now, but it does support DDR5. But it being the oldest CPU to support DDR5, or I guess the first CPU architecture to support DDR5, the support for DDR5 is going to be a little bit harder to get running if you're someone who's looking at running high speeds, especially if you're trying to increase density. So there are a couple things about RAM in general, and this applies not only to the type of RAM, so meaning are these Samsung, Hynix, or Micron, but also like the speed and also the density. So and also the number of DIMMs per channel. So like 2 DIMMs versus 4 DIMMs. So we're going to talk about that in this stream. So if you're interested in that, you might want to stick around. And then the newest platform to support DDR5 is the Intel 13th generation. So that just launched back in November of last year. Like literally a month and a half after. Well, actually, no, I take that back. It was October. Yeah, it was October. It was October for the 13th generation, and then it was very end of September for the AM5 generation. So there are some key differences between these architectures. We're going to talk about them now. So let me bring up my paint and let's get into it. So we're going to talk about AMD first, because I think that's the one that has more specifics in terms of things to look out for. So if you have a motherboard, we'll just say this is a standard ATX motherboard, with 4 DIMMs on the motherboard. We're just going to talk about 4 DIMMs. Now, I will briefly talk about 2 DIMMs, because if you're someone who's an enthusiast and you look up, like, if you're into memory overclocking, you have probably come across channels talking about, or I guess overclocking-centric channels, talking about the advantages of 4 DIMM or 2 DIMM motherboards versus 4 DIMM motherboards. So this is not really drawn to scale, but you can see this is a 4 DIMM motherboard. So typically the way these are going to be numbered, in order from the CPU socket, which would be over here in the middle. So this would be the CPU socket. We'll just kind of put that there. But in general, you have A1, A2, B1, B2. So they're kind of like that. So A1 is this one, A2 is that one, B1 is that one, and then B2 is this one, and so forth. So that's your typical standard ATX motherboard. It could be an eATX motherboard as well, but it's standard mainstream ATX motherboard with a 4 DIMM memory configuration. So typically with these, they're going to be daisy chained. Most motherboards today are daisy chained, and when I say daisy chained, those who are not familiar with that terminology, daisy chain means if I have, say, 4 things here in a line, if they're daisy chained, what that means is that the signal will basically interconnect like that. So they're kind of like daisy chain. Like, think of like a chain. Think of like links in a chain. That's essentially daisy chain. Now, the other topology would be something called T topology. And T topology isn't really seen much anymore, although, I mean, I don't know. Every now and then it does show up. But that one, the way that works is essentially you have two sets of traces that are kind of like a T, or I kind of think of it as like a Y. Something like this. So T topology is not really seen that much anymore, but that's kind of the differences in a nutshell. You don't really need to worry too much about that when it comes to DDR5, because it doesn't really factor into what motherboard you choose. Typically, all of them now are daisy chained. So the thing with 2-DIMM motherboards versus 4-DIMM motherboards, and the other thing too is, why is it that when you look in the manual, when you're connecting the DIMMs, or when you're watching somebody build a PC on YouTube and you're trying to just copy what they do if you're building your PC, the thing is, why do they always place 2 sticks of RAM in A2, this one, and B2, this one? So the question is, why is it that RAM, if you take 2 sticks of RAM because you want dual channel as opposed to single channel, although we are going to talk about DDR5 specifics, because but I don't want to confuse too many people yet. You always choose A2 and B2 as opposed to A1 and B1, because A2 and B2, it just so happens that those two are the first ones that touch the memory controller, or talk to the memory controller. So when you have 2 channels of memory, you have the A channel and the B channel. And then over here, this would be like the IMC right here. So this guy outputs to B and outputs to A. So when you plug in, it just so happens that the way these are designed via the wire traces in the motherboard, A2 is the first one to talk to the IMC. The IMC is this guy right here, the integrated memory controller in the CPU. And B2 is the first one to talk to the IMC on the other channel. So this is the reason why you install RAM in A2 and B2 first, and not A1 and B1. Now, if you plug RAM into A1 and B1 and you have A2 and B2 empty, what ends up happening is, because this is a daisy-chained topology, like I said earlier when we drew out the chain links, this is a daisy chain, which means A1 and A2 are hanging off of, or A1 and B1 are hanging off of A2 and B2. So when the voltage is coming through here, the electricity, the signal is coming through here, it's going to hit A2 first before it goes to A1. Meaning the amount of electric signaling that has to go through here to get to A1 is a lot more than what is needed to go to A2. So if you leave A2 empty and you plug RAM into A1 by mistake, either out of ignorance or just not following instructions, or you just don't know any better, what's going to happen on a daisy chain motherboard is the amount of signal that has to drive from the IMC all the way down here to get to the memory in A1, it's going to require way more. And because A2 has a bunch of open, basically there's nothing there, it's just a bunch of empty open space with nothing there, it's going to require way more strain on the IMC to push through all of that open circuit nothing and just kind of bypass all of that. So either what's going to happen is it's not going to work, you won't get a post, and you're going to think your motherboard's defective, or it will work because the motherboard manufacturer has some kind of extra traces in here that basically feed the signal over to A1, and it's somehow able to to get the signal. Although you're not going to be able to run the RAM at very high speeds. I mean, you probably managed to boot at 4800 on DDR5, which is the base. That isn't even like the base DDR5. That's more like the higher speed for JEDEC. So you might be able to run 4800, but probably not. Probably more like, 3600 or something. So that's just something to keep in mind, because I think one of the most common mistakes that people building PCs for the first time do is they plug the RAM into the wrong slots. You can't wait to test the dual 76G skill RAM in Samsung. Yeah, see, that's the other thing too. So the higher speed you go, the density kind of goes down, or like, I shouldn't say the density goes down. The higher speed you want to go, the less density you can run. So if you're trying to run, so for example, 7600 mega transfers on DDR5, you're typically going to be limited to 2 DIMMs. So, and this plays into what we're talking about here. So why A2 and B2 are the ones that you plug the RAM into, because of the signaling. Z790 do digital XMP transfers. Yeah. So that will work provided that the memory is plugged into A2 and B2. And then A1 and B1 are left empty. Now, a lot of this high-speed DDR5 stuff, it's really going to either be in a 2-DIMM configuration like this, or it would be in a 2-DIMM motherboard that only has 2 DIMMs. So, like one that doesn't even have A1 and B1. So you don't have this excess stuff down here, pulling down the voltage. So that's just something to keep in mind, because that's probably one of the most basic things. Like, this applies to DDR4 as well. DDR5 makes the problem, not really problem, but makes this even more important to remember, because DDR5, unlike DDR4, DDR5 typically has 2 banks per side. So what that means is, if you have a stick of DDR5, let me change the color here. So this is a stick of DDR5, and you have little squares of memory. We'll just draw like 4 of them. So these 4 sticks right here might end up being 1 bank of memory, and then you have, another set of 4 here, which would be like another bank. So you essentially have 1 bank here and another bank down here. So that basically means that you have more pseudo channels of memory per DIMM, because this is still considered a single rank DIMM, but it's like two banks of memory per rank. So it's kind of like a semi quasi dual channel with 1 stick of RAM, if that makes sense. So that's the reason why, if you had only 1 stick of DDR5 and you plug it in, it's not really going to be as bad as like single channel on DDR4. That's something to be aware of too. I think most people that are going to be buying into a DDR5 platform this year are probably already just going to start with 2 sticks of RAM, because they've always been told, or they've known since the DDR3 days, that dual channel is always better than single channel. But the reality is, with DDR5, because it's like 2 banks per rank, you don't suffer that much of a performance penalty if you go with 1 stick of RAM on DDR5 versus if you were to go with 1 stick of RAM on DDR4. So that's another thing I want to point out about that. It is also worth mentioning with DDR4, with the later DDR4, not DDR5, but DDR4, some of the newer RAM available today, I know from G-Skill, you can get single rank that actually fills both sides of the DIMM with memory, but it's still considered single rank. So the entire rank covers the entire, like, both sides of the DIMM. So if the board has higher traffic and no voltage capacity, does it matter? When you say higher traffic, no voltage. What do you mean by higher traffic? I'm not sure what you mean by higher traffic. You mean like more peripherals, more PCIe attached, more memory utilization? I'm not sure what you mean by that. You need to elaborate. What do you mean by higher traffic? No voltage capacity doesn't matter. No voltage capacity. I don't understand what you mean by no voltage capacity. But essentially what we're explaining here is if you have a daisy-chained motherboard, which is typically almost all of the DDR5 motherboards, as far as I'm aware, all of them are daisy-chained. You definitely are going to be using A2 and B2, especially if you're trying to hit the higher speed, you know, like 7,000 plus on megatransfers. You're going to need to use A2, B2, and you're not going to use 4 DIMMs. So I guess we'll just move this over here for now. Utilization. If the board has higher... I don't fully understand what you're asking, because NVMe, that's non-volatile storage, so that's not going to play into this. Whereas, and that's using PCIe lanes. If you're asking how the memory, like, is the memory speed dependent on the clock for, like, a clock generator for PCIe? So typically, the base clock is going to dictate a reference clock for not just the memory, but for other things on the board, like PCIe. So, whether we're talking synchronous or asynchronous, you were saying camped to DDR4 versus DDR5. I don't think the NVMe has anything to do with it. But the only thing they have in common is the base clock. The base clock is going to determine how fast the DDR... Because, for example, like, if we're talking about AMD, you know, AMD has that fabric clock for the Infinity Fabric, and that's basically Uncore. And everything ties back to that, ultimately. So all the PCIe, which that in turn will affect the NVMe. The RAM, the MEM clock is also based off of F-clock, roughly speaking. Now, I know with AM5 it's a little bit different. Now, with Intel uses different gears. So Intel introduced the concept of gears in 11th Gen Rocket Lake. And that has carried over with the Alder Lake and the Raptor Lake. But NVMe utilization shouldn't matter. It shouldn't have anything to do with how fast the RAM can go. What will matter is more the CPU, because if you push the RAM on Intel, if you push the RAM real far, you can't really push the CPU that far. And likewise, if you push the core on Intel very far, you will not be able to push the RAM as far. So it's usually one or the other. Intel maximize DDR5. Okay, so let's go over Intel is kind of basic. Like, there's not a whole lot to say other than you have to understand the gears. The gear ratio, which is very similar to AMD's U-clock and MEM clock. It's like the ratio between U-clock and MEM clock. So I think what I'll do is I'll use the AMD terminology because that's much easier to remember. Because AMD operates with the fabric clock, and there's literally like 3 things, and then Intel's literally just 2 of those things. So let's talk about the AMD one here. So let's move this guy over here because it still might be relevant, but I'm just going to move that over there. So with AM5, and this is not new, this is something that has existed with AM4. So like think Ryzen 1st gen all the way up to 3rd gen. So with AM5, there's 3 terms you need to know if you're wanting to run the memory at the maximum speed for DDR5. So there's the F-clock, the U-clock, and the MEM clock. So the F-clock, this is the fabric clock. So you can think of this as the Uncore frequency. So this one. And this is typically 2000 megahertz. And what I have found from my own testing is that if you try to push the fabric clock above 2 gigahertz or 2000 megahertz, you don't really change much at all in terms of the performance. So 2000 is really the sweet spot. You can run this slower, and by doing that, you can, in theory, run the U-clock and the MEM clock higher. But from what I have found is kind of like with AMD, it's all about finding some kind of balance. It's very interesting because it's kind of ironic how they use the term Zen to refer to the architecture. But from what I found, like playing around with AMD's settings for memory, it's all about trying to find the right balance. Hey, Puffin. Yeah, guys, if you like this content, if you want me to do more of these type of videos, like these in-depth, deep dive type videos on topics like this, be sure to hit the like button so we can get more, more views. So I appreciate it. But with Zen, like the F-clock typically is going to stay around 2 gigahertz, and that's not the cores. That is in the CPU, but that is responsible for everything that is not a core. So think of it like the frequency that's going to drive your peripherals. So the PCIe, the USB, everything that is based off of the motherboard that you plug in to the motherboard, all the signaling, all the peripheral, all that kind of stuff, that's going to be dependent on the F-clock. So the other one is the U-clock. The U-clock stands for the Unified Memory Controller Clock. This is also, think of this as the IMC, or the Integrated Memory Controller Clock. Now, this one runs, ideally, you want the U-clock to equal the MEM clock. So the MEM clock is going to be your data rate for your memory. Now remember, the name of the memory is DDR4. Hey, looks like we got a new sub. Let me see. Helio, thanks for the sub. You find this so interesting until this gen? You haven't been on RAM knowledge since DDR3. Yeah, so the thing is, with DDR3 to DDR4, nothing really changed except the voltages changed and also the speeds changed and the latency. DDR5 is more different than DDR4. So I'll say, like, if you're familiar with DDR3, DDR4 and DDR3 are a lot more similar than DDR5. I'll give you another example. When you plug in the voltage for your RAM, like for example, if you wanted to run, say, 2133 on DDR3, you would need like 1.65 volts typically to hit that speed. Some of the newer DIMMs were able to do that at 1.5, but you keyed in one voltage for the RAM, and that was basically it. Now with DDR4 was the same way. So DDR4, the voltages were 1.2 and 1.35. And then for DDR5, it's now, you don't actually have a VRAM voltage. It's actually something different now. It's called VDDQ and VDD, and we'll get into that later. But essentially, there's two different voltages. Actually, there's three voltages that you need to be aware of. But we're really going to talk about two of them specifically, because that's kind of the replacement to the typical DRAM voltage parameter that you would key in if you want to run XMP profiles at, like, 1866 or 2133. I'm talking about DDR3 XMP profiles. People are wondering, like, why am I talking about 2133? That's not really that fast. That's fast for DDR3. Now for DDR4, a typical XMP profile on DDR4 would be like 3200 megahertz, 3600 megahertz, maybe up to 4400 megahertz. And then in the latter days of DDR4, there were even higher speeds. But I kind of like left the DDR4 world like before any of that stuff was anything that I bothered to delve into. But anyway, so getting back to AM5, so the MEM clock, this is the memory clock. So this one, so what's unique about this one, remember that DDR5, so double data rate. So the MEM clock is always going to be the true actual memory clock, which is half of the advertised memory speed on the box. So for example, I have some, let's see here. I've got some G-Skill Flare X5. This is some AMD Expo memory. So this is DDR5 6000. So the Expo profile says 6000 megahertz. So the mem clock for 6000 megahertz would be half of that. So 3000 megahertz. So for example, if we say 3000 megahertz, so what I'll say here is for a 6000 megahertz Expo kit, you know, typically the F clock is going to be 2000, the mem clock is going to be 3000. And here's where it's interesting. So the U clock, which is the integrated memory controller's clock, that's inside the CPU, that's not on the memory, that's not on the motherboard, it's on the CPU. This is going to be a 1-to-1 ratio with the mem clock. So this one would also be 3000 megahertz for this scenario. So we're using an example of 6000 megahertz Expo memory, and typically this is going to be 2x 16 gigabyte. So this is going to be a 32 gigabyte configuration on 2 DIMMs, and you plug those into A2 and B2 on the board. So that's one example. Now let's talk about Intel for a second. So Intel is very similar. The only difference is with Intel, we'll say for LGA 1700. So that is basically Alder Lake and Raptor Lake. So with Intel, you have a B clock, and then you have something called Gear 1 and Gear 2 that you need to be aware of. So the B clock is kind of like it's the base clock, but you don't need to use this if you're just going to set XMP. So, hold on. So B clock is typically going to be like a 100 megahertz reference clock. But the only time you'd ever mess with B clock is if you wanted to try to, you know, hit for like an extreme overclock of the memory. You might modify B clock by, say, you know, 1 megahertz or something like that, just so you could squeeze out some more mega transfers off of the RAM. So what that allows you to do is that allows you to run at a higher memory speed while using a lower memory divider. So that's what that is. Now, Gear 1 and Gear 2. So Gear 1 is basically the 1-to-1 ratio. So like with AMD, when we said a 1-to-1 ratio, so I guess I should put the formula up here. So U-clock equals mem clock. This is a 1-to-1 ratio, right? So this, I know we're going to use some AMD terms here, but basically U clock equals mem clock is Gear 1 mode on Intel. Now, obviously what this really is saying is, since U clock and M clock is an AMD thing, just think of it as the RAM's memory clock is equal to the clock on the Intel integrated memory controller. That's basically what I'm trying to say. So that's what this is. And then for Gear 2 is where the U clock runs at half of the mem clock speed. So it's basically a half. It runs at half the speed of the mem clock. And AMD has this as well. They just don't call it Gear 1 and Gear 2. Basically what AMD has in the BIOS, you'll see like it's like U clock mem clock ratio. You'll say either 1-to-1, which is basically U clock equals mem clock, which is Gear 1 if we're talking Intel. Or you can do 1-to-2, which is U clock equals half of mem clock. And that's basically Gear 2 mode. So you have a 5600X. Oh, there was a comment earlier, but like YouTube like withheld it for some reason. But I saw the comment. So yeah, if you're just using the PC for browsing the internet and you're not really going to do a lot of stuff with it, then yeah, any budget-friendly XMP or Expo profile is sufficient. You have a 5600 system and a 7600 system that you built last year. You've been on Intel since 2600K. Appreciate you explaining this topic for AMD platform. Yeah. Yeah, and it's definitely new because none of this stuff, like even if we're talking about Intel, like Intel never introduced Gear 1 and Gear 2 until Rocket Lake. So what's funny is Rocket Lake is a DDR4 exclusive platform, so you cannot run DDR5 on a 11th gen Intel platform. But 11th gen Intel was where they introduced the concept of Gear 1 and Gear 2. But AMD uses the same feature. Like AMD has a U-clock equals mem-clock. With AMD, it's all about hitting a balance, meaning you want to try to keep the U-clock and the mem-clock in a 1-to-1 ratio. If you want to run higher speed memory on AMD, you would have to opt for the U-clock running at half of the mem-clock speed. So I guess the thing is with that, you can run the RAM really, really high speed, but your U-clock is going to run at half of what it normally would run at. So you kind of have to do some testing there to see if the latency is equal to or just slightly worse. Because with the higher speed memory, you're still getting way more throughput, way more bandwidth, memory bandwidth, in terms of reads and writes, but the latency might not be as good as if it was running at a 1-to-1 ratio. That's the reason why with AMD, from my own testing, I have found that the most optimal, and AMD themselves have come out and said this, but I have found that like 6,000 mega transfers on AMD, on AM5, so we're talking Ryzen 7000, is definitely the most optimal configuration. Like the latency is very, very low. If you were to run RAM much higher, like 6400 or higher, like 6600 or 6666. Now, I don't have any RAM kits myself, so I'm not able to test those speeds. And then overclocking is always kind of like, if you take 5600 megahertz DIMMs and you try to run them at 7200, like there's a lot of factors that are going to play into whether or not I can get those to be stable. One of them is the RAM themselves have to be able to handle those kind of speeds. So if they're not binned high enough, and obviously if I'm using like cheap DDR5, that's probably not going to be a thing. But then also I'm limited by the motherboard's BIOS, like how much voltage you can output there on the VDDQ, and then you're also limited by the strength of the IMC on the memory controller. So typically, what I would say is for AMD, try to go to 6,000 megahertz on Expo and look for an Expo rated kit rather than an XMP kit. The reason why you want to look for Expo branded memory is because it means that the motherboard manufacturers, like Gigabyte, MSI, Asus, ASRock, they actually like literally sat there and tested the RAM with their AMD motherboard and verified that it actually works. Whereas if you buy an XMP, XMP is typically an Intel protocol, or it's an Intel standard. So if you buy like XMP RAM, it could work, but because at the end of the day, the DIMMs are basically the same, but it might not have been tested. So what that means is, like, for instance, the motherboard manufacturer, if they didn't test the XMP RAM to work with the AMD motherboard, it might choose some suboptimal subtimings by default, or it might be overly aggressive. Like in the case of some of those Gigabyte boards, like Hardware Unboxed did a video on this recently. Gigabyte is overly aggressive with tuning the subtimings by default. So you can run into things like that. And if you're someone who doesn't want to sit there and key in every single individual setting on the RAM, then you're probably going to want to stick to Expo rated memory for AMD. And then for Intel, XMP is the way to go. But XMP is not new. It's been out there for a number of years now. So just stick with that and you'll be fine. I will say that I still haven't finished fully testing the 13th generation of Intel in terms of like what I can do with the memory. I do know that it's better than the 12th generation. Like the IMC on Raptor Lake is significantly better than Alder Lake. But I'm still noticing some issues with running a lot of RAM. So like 4 DIMMs still seems to be a problem. The G-Skill is the fastest RAM you can get currently. You can overclock it to 8,000 rather than buying the 8,000 CL36 version. Yeah, and the other thing too, that I might just kind of point out is even though the RAM can clock really really high, sometimes the IMC won't be able to keep up. So, like for instance, if you're gonna run 7600 DDR5, the Intel is gonna have to run in Gear 2. So that's basically going to be running the IMC on Intel is going to be running at half of the mem clock. So, if we do the math here real quick, 7600 half. So we'll use that example actually. So let's use an example with Raptor Lake. Running at 7600. So basically, here's an Intel example. G skill 7600 megahertz DDR5 CL34. So the way I do this is you want to get the mem clock. So the IMC is going to equal half of the actual memory speed, which is 3800. So half of that is going to be what the IMC is going to be running at. So that's going to be 1900. So this is what the IMC on the 13th gen is going to be running at with RAM clocked that high. So, this is the reason why, high-speed RAM is going to give you a lot more bandwidth, but the latency is a thing to keep in mind. Because this is going to, RAM that fast is going to require Gear 2 mode. Because it's going to be like way beyond what the IMC is going to be able to do. So like, because asking the IMC to run at 3800, I haven't seen one that does that. Maybe with like insane amount of voltage, but that's going to be pushing not just voltage on the RAM, because typically for the RAM you're going to be running at like 1.4 volts, or I guess if you're running RAM that's not binned, maybe 1.43 something volts. You're also going to have to adjust the VCC, SA voltage. Some of those other sub voltages on the IMC are going to have to be adjusted. And even then, I still think if you want full stability, you're going to have to run in Gear 2 mode for stability. Like, I'll tell you, I have not been able to get my Intel processor to run in Gear 1 mode at the rated speed. So, hey Joey. So Joey's saying DDR5 can't run in Gear 1. I've been wondering about that. I need to be doing more like investigation into the Intel processor that I have, because I too am not able to run mine in Gear 1 mode either. Now, granted, I am running 64 gigabytes of memory. And like I was saying earlier, if you're really trying to go for high-speed memory, if you're all about the speed and the memory bandwidth, then you want to go for 2 sticks of RAM maximum. If you try to run 4 sticks of memory, like we were showing earlier, think of this on the left. This is 1 stick of memory, right? And then this is another stick of memory. So these are the 2 DIMMs for one of the channels on the board. That's going to increase the electrical load significantly on the IMC. You can overclock most MDI to 8000. No need to buy the overpriced G-Skill unless going for records. Yeah, and if all we're talking about is trying to run the RAM as fast as possible, then Gear 1, Gear 2, Gear 1 doesn't matter. You just run Gear 2 mode and just that's it. Just know that the latency numbers aren't going to be exceptional. They're just going to be, average. Because you have to go really, really high. You'd have to go to like 8,000, because at 8,000, what is that? That's 4,000. The actual memory clock is 4,000. Because remember, it's double data rate. So it's 4,000 for 8,000 RAM. Or 8,000 megahertz or 8,000 megatransfers is actually 4,000 megatransfers. And then the IMC in Gear 2 mode is going to be half of that. So at 8,000 megahertz RAM, the Intel integrated memory controller is really only running at 2 gigahertz or 2,000 megahertz. So that's something to keep in mind, because that's the whole reason why Gear 2 mode exists. It exists so that those type of memory clocks are actually obtainable. Because it's one thing for the memory to be able to handle mega transfers in that frequency. It's another thing for the CPU's IMC to handle that. Because you have to remember, like with the RAM is literally only sitting there, like taking in bits and then like sending bits out. You're doing read and writes. The RAM is literally just responding to reads and writes. They're literally just flipping bits back and forth. But the IMC in the CPU is actually doing all the heavy lifting. It's actually doing all the hard work. All the loads and stores operations and pushing all that stuff to memory, the reads and the writes, signaling, all of that's the IMC. And the IMC has to do that for 2 channels. It has to manage 2 channels, right? So that's the other reason why it's much harder for the IMC to clock as fast as RAM, or that's why it's actually not obtainable, or it's not realistic. And then it gets even worse if you have 4 DIMMs. Think of the IMC as a juggler, like a circus juggler, right? So when you have 2 sticks of RAM, the juggler only is juggling like 2. Well, okay, if you have 2 channels, 1 DIMM per channel, that's like typically like 3 balls. The juggler is juggling 3 balls. The juggler is the IMC. So if you have 4 DIMMs, now the juggler's having to juggle more like, at least 4, if not 5 or 6 balls simultaneously, because of the amount of load on there. There's like 4 sticks of RAM, and especially if the density goes up. Like if we're trying to run like 128 gigabytes of RAM, these 7600 megahertz, not going to be happening with 128 gigabytes of RAM. Yeah, so that's kind of the gist of it all in terms of the memory. So the one thing things you want to be aware of is, if you're on Intel, Gear 1 and Gear 2, what those actually mean. So if you're trying to hit high speed RAM on Intel, like 7600 as an example, or maybe 8000, just know that you're gonna have to use Gear 2. So I need to get some water, man. My throat is like really dry right now. I got sick like before Friday, and I've been trying to recover. So if you guys watched my latest video, I sounded kind of weird in that video, and that's why. Yeah, it's for a gaming PC. I mean, that makes sense, right? Like, for a workstation, the 7600's not going to be a thing, but Gear 2 is going to be is higher latency. Gear 2 is higher latency, but you cannot run. What I'm saying is, you cannot run 7600 megahertz with Gear 1. It's impossible. My example with the juggling is the analogy. It's too many balls to juggle for the IMC. Okay, so in DCS and Star Citizen, tuned memory is 20% faster than XMP. Yeah, in general, but you kind of have to see the problem with tuned memory is there's so much trial and error. Like you have to mess with all the subtimings, or not all the subtimings, but you have to adjust subtimings a lot, and then you have to test for stability, because then it's probably not 100% stable. So you need to run like mem test or something to make sure it's stable. So, but okay, now that we've talked about the high speed, let's talk about like everyday average, like what is a good let's talk about more like a prosumer workstation. So not so much like high speed, but what if I want to run like high capacity? What if I want to run 4 DIMMs and I want 128 gigabytes of memory? Right? Because these motherboards support 128 gigabytes of memory. DDR5 cannot run Gear 1 no matter what speed. Really? I mean, mine Mine is running in Gear 2 mode. I haven't tried to do Gear 1. I know last year with 12th gen, I could not get my DDR4 memory to run in Gear 1 mode either. But I thought that's because I was running 4 DIMMs. Wow, I need to look into that. I think you're right though. But that is kind of weird because that would mean that I haven't really benchmarked the DDR5 memory on my Raptor Lake, but I think that you know, I know it's running Gear 2, which means the latency is probably really bad. But like, okay, I'll just give you guys a quick way to tell. Like, this is not really a scientific calculation, but typically what I do is I take the number and I divide it by the CL, the cast latency. So in this case, 34. And I do this to kind of somehow like try to guess whether or not it's worth running the memory that fast. Right? So what is this? This becomes, oh, this is gonna be very, very high spec. So this is 223.5. We'll just round it to 224. So the number I get is, the ratio I get is 224. So what if I take more budget-friendly RAM? Like, what if we do, like, 5600 megahertz at CL30? Like, what is that? I'll tell you, the reason why I'm using this is because this is actually what I'm running. Divided by 30. So this is going to be 187. So that's, so, you know, the number's less. So the higher the number here, the better, in general. So it's a function of DDR5. No, I don't think it's a function. I don't think it's a function of DDR5. I think it's more a I think it's a function of the IMC. They say 5600 is what we're just talking about, stable. Yeah, so I guess I'm just giving you guys some examples here, right? So if we do like 6000 at CL36, I'm just giving you guys some example of RAM kits that I actually have. So this one is 36, this is 167, so this one's actually worse. So, oh no, 180 to 167. So this is a rough kind of a, this isn't really a scientific thing. This is just something that I always would do since the DDR3 days. So like if I was gonna buy RAM, and let's say the RAM was rated for 7600, obviously it's DDR5, and then I would see the cast latency. So I would take the division of that, or the ratio of that. So 7600 divided by 34, yeah, it's 224. So that's a really good number. It's a big number over these. So here's more budget-friendly stuff. So this one's 5600, cast latency 30, out of the box, XMP profile. You know, that's going to equate to 187. So here's some Expo RAM. So this is the free RAM. So this RAM that you guys see here, that I've highlighted, I got this for free from Micro Center when I bought my AM5 CPU. So this is the G-Skill Flare X5. So this is literally 6000 megahertz, cast latency 36. So it comes out to 167. So my thing is, this is the sweet spot for Ryzen in terms of you're able to hit U-clock equals mem-clock, F-clock is 2000, IMC clock is 3000. Mem clock is also 3000, so it's 1-to-1. So this would be essentially a Gear 1 scenario if we're talking about Intel. Which memory IC did you get on your 6000? I'll talk about that too. Actually, I'll tell you guys. I'll teach you guys a technique about how to guess if a memory kit is Hynix or Samsung. Because I've been pretty good at guessing myself, and I've gotten accurate every single time. And it's actually a pretty easy way. I think we've talked about it in a previous live stream. But I'll reiterate it again here for those that didn't see that earlier live stream. So, yeah, I'll answer that question, Kevin, because that's a very good question. So we'll just go ahead and talk about that right now. So, the easiest way to tell if you have Hynix, if you're going to buy Hynix memory or Samsung memory, if you don't know, like for example, if it's a Team Force kit or some Corsair Vengeance, or Corsair Dominator, or some G-Skill, like Trident Z or Trident Z5 Neo. The easiest way to tell is you look at the advertised primary timings. So I'll give you guys two examples. We'll use my two kits. So I've got Ripjaw's XMP, which is that 5600 megahertz kit, cast latency 30. Then I have Flare X5 Expo for AMD memory, and that's that 6000 megahertz kit that was free. So I'm gonna type them out. So 5600 megahertz G-Skill Ripjaws. This is, I'm gonna type out the timings. This is CL 30, 36, 36, 89, 1.25 volts. That's this one, okay? The other one, the AMD Expo memory, is 6000 megahertz, and the primary timings are CL 36, 36, 36, 96, 1.35 volts. Okay, so what I'm going to tell you guys is all you got to do, if you want to see if it's Hynix or Samsung without having to do too much Googling on the internet, although you can eventually find the answer, all you got to do is take the first number, so in this case 30 for this top one, and you compare that number to the second and third numbers. If the first number is equal to the second and third number, so in the example down here, we have 36, 36, 36. So the first number is equal to the second and third number. That is Samsung memory. Samsung memory. If the first cast latency number is equal to the second number, it's Samsung memory. There is a high, like greater than 85% chance, maybe greater than 90% chance that it is a Samsung memory kit. If the first number is different from the second and third number, it is SK Hynix. Like there is a very, very high probability that it is SK Hynix memory, like greater than 90%. So I can tell you, like right here, Flare X5, 36, 36, 36, this is Samsung memory. So this Expo kit of RAM is Samsung. I verified it with CPU-Z. And then this Ripjaw S5 Intel XMP kit, 5600, this is SK Hynix. Verified from CPU-Z. So that's the easiest way I can tell you guys, because it's like, I have two sets of the Ripjaws. Both of them are 30, 36, 36, 89, 1.25. They're both Hynix. Two separate sets of 64 gigs each. So, like, if I were to combine both of them together, that's 4 sticks of memory equal to 128 gigabytes of RAM right there. And then we have the DDR5, the free memory from Micro Center, the Flare X. This is 32 gigabytes. So 2x16, 6000 megahertz, and this is Samsung memory. And then I have another one. I have another one somewhere. Let me find that real. Oh, here it is. Here's another one that is not in use. You can see the DIMMs are still inside the plastic. This was also free memory. This was the free memory when I got the 7950X. This one is 56, but it's 2x16. So this is a 32 gigabyte kit. Cast latency is 36, 36. So actually, I'll just tell you guys right here. This is another Samsung kit. And I can already tell it's Samsung. So this third one that I have, or this third sample, is again 5600, and it is cast latency 36. And it's 36, 36, 36, 89 at 1.2 volts. This is Samsung memory. This is also Samsung memory, and it is Flare X5. So there you go. That is four different sets of RAM that I have for testing, and you know, like anytime the cast latency, the primary number is different from the other two numbers, it has always been Hynix, and every time all three of those numbers are the same, it has always been Samsung. That's the easiest way to tell. which memory IC did you get in your 6000 Expo? Oh, you mean, well, it's Samsung memory. So I don't know because I only pay attention to Hynix A die and Hynix M die when it comes to DDR5. So it's some Samsung memory. I don't know what it is, but how do you know if it is A or B? Is there an easy way to tell? There is actually no easy way to tell. One of the ways you can kind of guess, but even then it's still a guess, is the voltage. If the voltage is, like, for example, you guys can see my Hynix memory. My Hynix memory is doing 5600 at 1.25 volts. So that's literally just DDR spec. I mean, that's JEDEC voltage, but it is higher than JEDEC speed. So that's technically considered an overclock with the same JEDEC voltage. So that's kind of a good way to tell. That's probably Hynix M die if I had to guess. 36, 46, 121. Is that actually memory? You'd have to run Typhoon Burner to tell. Yeah, Mr. Siege with the 36, 46. Normally, RAM doesn't have timings like that. Like, normally it would be like 36, 30, or it would be like 36, 46, and then some, 121 or something. Or some big number. Why is it, I'm confused on this. So, is that like 36, 46? I think it's 36, 46, 121. I don't know why you have 36, 46. But that's Hynix memory. I can already tell that's Hynix memory. If it's 36, 46, 121, that's Hynix memory. Because 36 is the first number and 46 is the second and third number, and they're different, so therefore it's Hynix memory. I can just guess it's Hynix memory just from that, knowing that. But also, like, if we're talking about like really high speed memory, you know, like 7600, 8000, like that is gonna be Hynix. Like, you don't even have to look at the subtimings to guess. Where the guessing makes sense is if you're trying to save money on memory. And like, let's say you want to buy like a G-Skill 6000 megahertz kit, but you want to make sure you're getting Hynix memory as opposed to Samsung memory. Then you're going to want to look for something like, for example, cast latency 30, 36, 36, or cast latency 28, 32, 32, or 28, 34, 34, 96 or something, right? Like, that would be Hynix memory. So anytime the first number is different from the second number, it's probably Hynix memory. And anytime the two numbers are the same, it's most likely Samsung memory. And the reason why, those wondering why am I not talking about Micron, the reason why I'm not talking about Micron is Micron currently, as of right now, Micron doesn't sell any of the really high speed kits. Now, if you're looking for a lot of memory, like if you're looking, for example, if you want like 64 gigabytes of memory or 128 gigabytes of memory, it's a lot of money. But you can get like Micron memory that can go up to like 5200. Yeah, that's Hynix memory because it's 36, 46, 121. So I guess just to summarize, then we're gonna move on. Just look at the first number and the second number. If the first number and the second number are the same, it's probably Samsung memory. There's a good chance that it's Samsung memory. If the first number and the second number are different from each other, then there's a good chance that it's Hynix memory. So let me pull up some. Let's just look at G-Skill. Let's look at some examples here on G-Skill's website. Here. Okay, so let's look at this. So let's look at some AMD Expo memory because this stuff is like really easy to as like an exercise. So look at this. So this is 6000 cast latency 32 and then 38, 96 at 1.35 volts. So this is most likely, this first one here, actually, should I zoom in so people can see? There, let me make it easier to see. So this first one here, oh, you guys can't see the mouse for some reason. All right, anyway, let's just click on this one. So this one right here, 6,000, 32, 38, 38, 96 at 1.35 volts. This is SK Hynix memory. I can already tell the first number is 32, the second number is 38. This is Hynix memory. Like, no doubt on my mind, this is Hynix memory. Hynix memory, you know, it's pretty common at 6,000 and above. But that doesn't mean that you can't find Samsung memory at 6,000 megahertz. Like, the memory kit that I have is Samsung, and it is 6,000 megahertz. So this is an example of a Hynix M die. This is probably Hynix M die, for those wondering. So within the DDR5 overclocking community, there's A die Hynix and there's M die Hynix. So A die Hynix is typically going to be the ones that they're selling at like cast latency 28. But this one's going to be cast latency 32. I mean, this could be A die, but I want to say, you know, at 1.35, 6,000, you know, with these, this is probably M die Hynix. All right, so let's look at another example. Googling this question and you're live. Okay, what was the question? Oh, the differences between like JEDEC and XMP. All right, so let's look at this next one here. So here's another one. So this one is actually the memory kit that I have. So this is the memory kit that we are streaming live to the internet with right now. Except the only difference is that I'm running a 64 gigabyte kit and this is a 32 gigabyte kit. But in terms of the memory frequency, you know, this is what I'm using, 5600, cast latency 30, 36, 36, 89. This is another SK Hynix stick, or I guess DIMM configuration. So I know this one for a fact because I actually have this one. So this is, again, this is Hynix M die, for those wondering. So Hynix M die can go down to this. Now I think they have another one. So the nice thing about this is because this is M die, I can overclock this to maybe 6400 if I wanted. I'd have to bump the voltage to like 1.35 or 1.4. But that is something to keep in mind. You know, this is 5600 at 1.25. So that's actually a relatively low voltage. It's above JEDEC reference speed. And this is an XMP and an Expo memory frequency, so 5600. It's a pretty common one, I would say. And the thing that I forgot to mention, and we haven't even talked about this, is someone might be wondering what is an official speed that they can buy memory, not pay so much money on memory, they can save money on their RAM, and they can still run an Expo or an XMP kit at the maximum rated speed. So I think we should talk about that first. So let's talk about Ryzen first. So Ryzen 7000 series, official spec for memory. Let's look at the full spec. So I'm just looking at the 7600X, but this applies to all of them, all the way up to the 16-core, 32-thread 7950X flagship. So they're all going to have the same memory support. So if we go down here, somewhere in here, where is it? DDR5. Okay, so maximum memory speed, DDR5 5200. So 5200 is the maximum rated speed. So it is worth noting this is above the JEDEC reference of 4800. So it's 5200, so it is still, you know, 400 megahertz above the standard JEDEC. But it is not nearly as high as you would think. Like, for example, we were talking earlier about like DDR5 6000 or 7600. You know, that's going to be way beyond what is officially supported. So what this means is that if you were to buy 5200 megahertz Expo or even XMP RAM, you could stick it into the computer, turn it on. The post time after the first boot will be really fast. You won't have to train so much because you're not trying to like crank up the speed on the RAM that high beyond like maximum support. This is literally just supported speed. So 5200 is fine. And the thing is, like, if you wanted to, you could run 64 gigabytes at this speed, 100% stable. And you could also look for the lowest latency possible. So, you know, you could tune this to like cast latency 28 or something. And it would be fine. So that is one thing to note, because I think not a lot of people talk about, like, well, what if I don't want to run outside of the official spec? Like, what if I wanted to run within spec and then tune for the latency? Well, I mean, that's where that comes in, right? Like, look for low latency DDR5 5200. And the nice thing about that is there's a lot of affordable options at 5200, especially if you want to go to 64 gigabytes. So for a workstation, that would be ideal in terms of stability and density of RAM. So that's going to be it for AMD. If we compare that to DDR4 on the previous gen, the DDR4 one, if we go to full, I think it's going to be like 3200, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so 3200 was the maximum official spec for DDR4. Dylan, you just built a 7950X on a B650E, G-Skill 3200, 6000. Yeah, and that's typically the sweet spot. But I will say, like, where 5200 makes sense is if you were to step up to 64 gigabytes of memory. As you increase the density, it gets harder and harder to run at the maximum speed. So that is something to note. So what I'm describing here is this is more so of an everyday workstation scenario, right? Where you're not trying to get overclocking world records. This isn't necessarily only for gaming. It's for more than just gaming, like content creation, stability. The amount of memory that's actually needed is going to actually be used. So that's where 5200 makes sense. If we compare this to Alder Lake, so the Intel 12th gen, so this was Intel's first CPU generation that added support for DDR5. If we look here, so Alder Lake, DDR5, the maximum official supported memory speed was 4,800 megatransfers. So Alder Lake, so typically the way I interpret this is the lower the maximum official spec is, that means that if you try to run higher speeds, it'll be significantly more challenging. So that is to say that because this one's official spec is 4,800, you're really playing the silicon lottery in terms of trying to see if you get a good IMC in order to run well above 4,800. So that's something to keep in mind. So Ryzen is AM5 is AMD's first DDR5 implementation, just like how Alder Lake was Intel's first. So AMD's first generation maxes out at 5200 in terms of the official specs. So it's a little bit better than Intel's first generation. So what this means is, like, I might be lucky if I can get 5600 or 6000 stable on an Alder Lake, whereas with this guy, 6000, pretty much everybody can hit 6000 on 32 gigs. But because the max is 52 official, like, going above 6000 is going to be really challenging. So if we take a look at Raptor Lake, so this is Intel's second implementation of DDR5. So Raptor Lake, maximum support is 5600. So that is much improved over Alder Lake. And this is the reason why, like, when people come to me asking, oh, you can run at true DDR5. Yeah, I'm going to probably do a video about that for both platforms in the future, Joey, because I've been wanting to do that. It's just I haven't had the time to take apart, because, like, having to mess with the RAM on my two workstations, it's going to cause some downtime. So, but anyway, like, I want to cover that too in depth. But that's nice you can get 6400. Because that means you have a pretty good IMC on that AMD CPU. Because with Raptor Lake, I think all of the high-speed RAM that a lot of people are talking about, like 7,000 plus, 7,200, 7,600, even 8,000, those are probably all going to be exclusive to Raptor Lake. And it makes sense when you look at the official spec. So Intel's saying, the maximum official support on Raptor Lake, 13th gen, is 5,600. So because this one is 56 versus AMD's 52 and Intel's Alder Lake 4,800, that tells me that Raptor Lake should clock the highest in terms of overclocking memory. Ryzen should be second fastest in terms of the absolute max that it can do. And then Alder Lake should be third, since it's, you know, the first ever DDR5 implementation, and their official support is really low end there. So, oh, on 64, wow. Yeah, I'm gonna need to play around with my subtimings because I can't get mine to go. I can't get 64 gigs stable on my XMP kit. What's your memory kit that you're using? So, yeah, because I need to know what that is, because I'm using an XMP memory kit. So the one that I'm using, let me bring back up the paint here. This is what I'm using. This one right here. And I can't get this one stable at 6,000. And that's a 64 gigabit kit. Or 64 gigabyte kit. If it's been covered, you tried going back and catching it. DDR5 XMP. Yes, that'll work. XMP will work. I can tell you right now, so the memory that I am running is, and we saw it on the website, this is the memory that I'm running. I'm running an XMP rated kit, Ripjaws, 64 gigabyte, and I have ran it at 5200 and it works totally fine, and it's XMP, not Expo, it's XMP, so it's supposed to be for Intel, but I'm using it with my AMD platform and it works totally fine. So, and at that speed, it'll be 100% stable. You don't have to worry about it. Anytime you go, because, and the reason why you don't have to worry about it is because it's official, it's an official speed supported by AMD. Meaning, if you run 5200 megahertz, regardless of whether it's XMP or Expo, it is an official spec by AMD, which means AMD does not consider it an overclock in terms of an overclock on the integrated memory controller on the Ryzen CPU. Now, a motherboard manufacturer like Gigabyte or MSI or Asus or ASRock, they will most likely not consider it an overclock either. They'll consider it within spec because it is an official spec supported by the memory, because it's 5200 kit, and AMD's IMC, the integrated memory controller, can handle 5200 without any issues. Where that will become a problem is if you try to run 4 sticks and very high density. So, like for example, 128 gigs. So let me make it a little bit more clear. So let's go back here. Let me see. Where is it? Because somewhere in here, AMD, like they tell you the DDR5 support. I don't know. Like, let me see if we can find it on their website. Well, these are just like these are different memory kits. I mean, I guess you could use this webpage to search for yours. But like, let's just use Gigabyte. Let's just look at one of these motherboards. So let's take a look at this motherboard. So this is the motherboard that I am using to stream on this computer right now. So this is like, I'm using a real world example right now. So if we look here, specification. Okay, notice right here, let me zoom in. Notice right here on Gigabyte's official page, support for DDR5, and then they've got all these right here. But notice right here, they all have an OC next to them. 5600 OC, 6000 OC. That means these are considered overclocked. That means that these speeds are not guaranteed to be 100% stable by the manufacturer. Meaning, if you want to run DDR5 at these speeds on this specific motherboard, that's going to be on the user to fine-tune the sub-timings, the primary timings. So, you know, it's going to be more work than just load the XMP profile and hope that it works, or load the Expo profile and hope that it works. You might get lucky, especially at these lower speeds. You can probably load 6000 or 5600 and it'll probably work, As long as it's like 32 gigabytes max, so two 16 gig DIMMs, they'll probably be okay. But if you try to do 64 gigs, or any kind of like 4 DIMM configuration or something, like these are definitely not going to be guaranteed out of the box. But because for the example with the 5200, notice how 5200 doesn't have an OC next to it. That means Gigabyte and AMD do not consider this out of spec. This is considered within spec. So you can run, 2 DIMMs of either like 16 times 2 or 32 times 2, and you'll be totally fine with 5200. Yeah, if you want to do 64, you want to do 2 sticks of 32. You don't want to do 4 sticks of 16. And there's more reasons why 2 sticks of 64 is better than 4 sticks for 64. One of them is less latency, because single DIMM per channel, single DIMM per channel is going to be better than 2 DIMMs per channel. Less strain on the integrated memory controller. On Intel, you can overclock it a lot more than that. Oh yeah, I need to note down the memory that you have. I might need to look for that exact RAM kit. Is that was that Expo or XMP? Oh, if it's 64, it's probably an XMP profile. Joey, real quick, one question I had for you. What motherboard is that on the MSI? Is that on the Ace motherboard that you're able to achieve that? Because the motherboard does matter. The motherboard does play some role in it, especially if you're trying to just let the motherboard tune it for you and you don't want to mess too much with the subtimings. Yeah, that's what I mean. That goes in. That makes sense, right? Because what I was saying earlier, like Raptor Lake is saying, Intel's telling us that 5600 is like maximum support. So that means that, that would, to me, this implies that 13th gen should be able to clock higher than Ryzen, and it can clock higher than Alder Lake on the memory. Yeah, somewhere in here, I thought that it showed it. I don't know why I don't see it here. But basically that's what they're saying. Yeah, on the Ace. Yeah, because I don't know. I think I'm gonna have to look at like the subtiming table on mine, because I think Gigabyte is too over aggressive with some of the subtimings, so that results in instability. Because what I haven't done, I haven't tried to sit there and manually tweak every single subtiming on that memory list in the BIOS. I let Gigabyte's BIOS choose, and then whatever it thinks is going to work, and then I test it for stability, and it's not stable at 6,000. So, but now granted, my memory kit is not a 6,000 kit, so there could be more factors at play. Like it could just be that the memory that I have is just not binned well enough to handle 6,000, because it's only a 5600 megahertz kit. And maybe I just got unlucky, so that could be a factor too. So, but that is worth noting. So 5200 on Ryzen is standard spec, so you don't need to worry. And with Intel, with the 13th gen 5600, so like let's just look at this as another example. Z790. Let's look at the Intel equivalent motherboard here. So this one is the Z790 Aorus Master. If we click here. Right here, so notice right here, okay, well, Gigabyte just ruined my assumption here, because they're okay, I think I know what's going on. So what I wanted to show was that this would not have an OC next to it, but it does, and I know the reason why. These also have OC next to it, and the reason why Gigabyte's doing that is because of backwards compatibility with Alder Lake. Because you can run a 12th gen processor off of a Z790 motherboard, and Alder Lake only supports, up to 4800. For compatibility reasons, they have to you know, only go up to the lowest common denominator. That's the reason why like 5600 has an OC next to it. Even though if this was a 13 gen exclusive board, this would definitely not have an OC next to it. It would look kind of like how the AMD one looks, where this is official spec. So I won't be able to illustrate that example like I wanted, but you guys get the idea. The other thing too is the AMD motherboards can support ECC memory, but that's going to be vendor specific. So you're gonna, if you want to run ECC or error code correction memory, which is definitely not going to be for someone who's just wanting to play games on their PC. But if you want to do something with content creation and you don't want your computer blue screening randomly, or just, you know, apps crashing due to RAM issues or whatever, ECC memory definitely is the way to go. But ECC memory is going to be really expensive, and you're typically only going to be running at no higher than 4800 megahertz, regardless of which processor brand you go with. So that's typically, or I guess that's most of what I wanted to cover on this stream. So I'll probably do a video talking about, or like showing the BIOS with the subtimings and stuff. But I need to do my own like deep dive studying up on like tuning it to get the higher speeds stable on mine, because I can't get my XMP memory to run at 6000. So, but I do know, like, if you're on AMD, the other thing too is you want to always be on the lookout for the BIOS updates, because I got one of these like day one, and I can tell you, like, there is a world of difference between the current BIOS and like the day one BIOS in terms of memory. Like, the thing that has changed the most, and I think this also applies to Intel, although with Intel, you know, I didn't buy into DDR5 with Alder Lake, and that was Intel's first generation of DDR5. And from what I can tell, reading things online, it was just as bad, if not slightly worse, of an experience trying to tune memory, and the whole Gear 1 and Gear 2 mode, and Gear 1 mode never working, and all that kind of stuff. So what I can say is, like, the fact that you can actually run a Gear 1 configuration, meaning U-clock equals mem-clock, on Ryzen and their first generation of DDR5 is pretty nice. But, like, in the beginning, we couldn't necessarily get 6000 working and like 24/7 stability. And then now, you know, it's like now it just works. And like in the beginning, you know, when Ryzen first launched, or when Zen 4 first launched back in, you know, late September last year, if you were running an Expo profile or XMP profile, like, you couldn't put your computer to sleep, because either it wouldn't work at all, or it would not wake up. So, like, there were bugs like that that I talked about on the channel, like, when that was relevant back at the time. But all these BIOS updates have fixed a lot of those early teething issues. Also, the 64 kit is dual rank, which is faster. Yeah, anything that's 64, anything that's a 32 gig DIMM is going to be dual rank. Yeah, because mine is dual rank. Like, the Flare X memory that Micro Center gave me for free, this stuff is single rank. But the 64 gig kit that I'm running, the 56 megahertz RAM, this is dual rank. So yeah. Yeah, I think it's the Gigabyte board, and every time they say, you know, improve memory compatibility, well, they need to improve the memory compatibility even further, because from what I've heard, MSI and Asus seem to be slightly better when it comes to memory speed, and still being 100% stable. But I think that's pretty much that's pretty much what I wanted to cover on this stream. So there's not a whole lot. I guess let me go back to the paint file here and let's see if there's anything else I want to talk about. So if you want to run 128 gigs of RAM, I guess we'll talk about high density RAM. You have to typically run 4 sticks of RAM. So that means not only is A2 and B2 going to be populated with RAM, but you're going to have to populate A1 and B1. So that means the signaling on here, you know, from the IMC, it's going to have to enumerate this. It's going to have to, via daisy chaining, it's going to have to then enumerate that one. And then likewise with the A channel, it's going to have to enumerate that and then daisy chain and then get this one. So that increases the electrical load on the IMC on how much memory it has to address. So that is going to add latency, and the way that happens is that you can't run the memory as fast. All 64 is not dual rank. Yeah, I know. So I know with DDR4, not all 64 is dual rank. That, yeah. Now DDR5, you might be right, but I haven't heard of any DDR5 RAM that's been manufactured as of yet that if it is a 32 gig DIMM, I haven't heard of one that's single rank. Like I personally have 64 gigabytes of RAM that, or like a 32 gig DIMM that is single rank, but it's DDR4. What I have found is that in the later, like, because the DDR4 technology today is so much more mature than it was years ago, you can get a 64 gig kit that it includes 2 single rank DIMMs. But that applies to DDR4. I'm not sure about DDR5. Like, I don't doubt that you can't do dual rank, or you can't do single rank 64 gigs. It's just I haven't really heard of anybody that has a kit of RAM that is single rank, that is also 64 gigs. But that would be ideal. Like, if there is a single rank DIMM that's 32 gigs sold as a 64 kit 2 DIMM configuration, that is probably the most ideal RAM for Ryzen, actually. And that could also help Intel as well for like running higher clocks, because single rank is slightly worse latency than dual rank, but you know, it's easier on the IMC. Yes, and I talked about that earlier. I did say that you can have a dual-sided DIMM, so RAM on both sides, and it can still be single rank. Yeah, I talked about that earlier. Because I actually have a set of 64 gigabytes of DDR4 G-Skill RAM, interestingly enough, that is single rank, and it's from Micro Center. That's what I used with my old AM4 platform. And that RAM was relatively modern. It's not RAM it was RAM that was purchased probably like a year ago, almost 2 years ago now, probably. So not really old RAM, but because I know, like, to do single rank, it's definitely a more mature process for that kind of density. Yeah, no issues. I mean, yeah, we talked about, like, banks of memory, and then ranks of memory, and then channels of memory. That's kind of like the first thing that was talked about. So you can have a dual-sided DIMM that is single rank, but you can also have a dual-sided DIMM that's dual rank. But I think with DDR5, the way DDR5 is manufactured currently, I think any single-sided DDR5, it's single rank, but it's dual bank. So, like, for example, this is one bank of RAM, and then this is the other one right here. So that's 2 banks of memory, but the entire thing is a single rank stick. And likewise, if we had this flipped, like if there was memory on both sides, With DDR5, typically that means it's going to be 4 banks of memory across 2 ranks. But I don't know. Maybe there's 4 ranks or 4 banks of memory on a single rank. I'm not sure how that's addressable via the IMC. That's a little bit more advanced. It's kind of like outside of my understanding of DDR5. But they'll probably be able to do it in the future. I'm sure that's going to be a thing later on. Because I think that's how you're going to be able to get higher density off of a single DIMM. It's certainly going to be true for like mobile. Like for laptops, like SODIMM. You'll have like RAM on both sides of the small little laptop stick of RAM, and that's probably going to be a single rank DIMM. Okay, so I'm trying to think, like, was there anything else that I wanted to mention? So we talked about Gear 1, Gear 2, the U-clock equals mem-clock ratio. We gave some examples. Yeah, I guess, does anybody know, I don't know if there's anybody still watching, I know we've lost most of the viewers, but if anyone has been able to run DDR5 in Gear 1 mode on Intel, like at all, because that is something that I have not been able to do myself, and it surprised me, because with AMD, when we run the U-clock and mem-clock in a 1-to-1 ratio, this is effectively like Gear 1 mode on Intel. I think of this as 1T versus 2T, like the command rate in the DDR4 days. So those who are familiar with DDR4 and are looking at upgrading to DDR5, they might want to keep this in mind. If you guys recall the command rate, 1T, I don't know why it's this color, 1T is kind of like Gear 1, and 2T is kind of like Gear 2. So I'll just move that down there. Again, it is impossible to run DDR5 in Gear 1. Is it because of an issue with Intel's IMC? Because the gears have to do with the integrated memory controller. Like, Gear 1 and Gear 2 is literally just Intel's terminology for this. That's all Gear 1 and Gear 2 is. So what's the reason why you can't do Gear 1 then? This makes me curious about, like, Rocket Lake now. Because Rocket Lake was DDR4 and had Gear 1 and Gear 2. So if AMD runs at Gear 1, 6000 DDR, and Intel for the MC to run at 3000 would need to run DDR5 even at 8000 equals 2000. So why does Intel have lower latency? AMD tops out, I've seen, around 50 to 51 nanoseconds. That's a really good question, because the way I think about it is if Intel can't do Gear 1, I don't understand how Intel's latency is so good. Because Gear 2 is literally like the memory clock is like half. So I'm not sure exactly how. Oh, you know what? There might be some of that, like with the CCDs. Part of it is the CCDs. But I don't know, because, like, if you were to test, like, has anyone tested a Ryzen 7 7700X and see what the latency is like on one of those? Because I was thinking at first glance, maybe it's because of the dual CCDs, but I don't know if that's the case. Because they're all going through the fabric. So it's like, I don't really know if that comes into play. It might be the F-clock. You know what? If I had to guess the reason why AMD's latency is worse, it's probably because of F-clock, the fabric clock, only typically going at around 2000. That's probably the reason. Because with the AMD architecture, you have to remember that in order for the CPU, so on the AMD CPU, you have your dual CCDs then you have your I/O die right here. As far as I know, the I/O die talks to the memory. Now, I could be wrong. I haven't really looked at the AMD block diagram in a while, but I assume that it is this guy that has the traces to the memory. So because of that, that might be the reason. Because the fabric clock has some relation here. Like, it's related somehow to these other two things. So it could be something like that. If I had to guess, that's one of the reasons. I don't know if that's the reason. I assume it is, because I remember, like, back in, like, Zen 3, the F-clock was typically, you know, 1800 for 3600 DDR4. You know, and I remember people saying that you couldn't really go above 1900 on the fabric clock on Zen 3, which is Ryzen 5000. So that might be part of it. Intel doesn't have that fabric clock. Intel still has the U-clock and the MEM clock. I just know, like what Joey's saying, is you can't run Gear 1 with DDR5, which means that the U-clock on Intel is basically half, right, of the MEM clock. So if the memory is 6000, which means that's 3000, and that means your IMC on the Intel CPU is only 1500. Intel at 8000 equals 2000 memory clock. Yeah, right. So fabric at 2000. Yeah, so it's still, it's funny because it's like the memory speed at, even though the RAM is like so high up there at 8000, the fabric clock on Intel, if you can call it a fabric clock, because it's not really a fabric clock, it's the IMC clock on Intel is only like 2000. So it's only the same speed as like the AMD one at like 6000 on the RAM. So I think it might be the F clock. There is some these three are somehow interrelated somehow, and I think that's part of the reason, if I had to guess. The AMD IMC is a lot stronger because it can run Gear 1, but Intel can't. You know, that's an interesting take on it. Like, I mean, I guess because Intel, like at 8000 on the RAM, Intel's able to get up to like 2000, and even then, that means you got a pretty good IMC on the Intel CPU. DDR5 is designed to run in Gear 2. The DDR5 standard allows up to 2 commands to be issued per memory. Oh, yeah. You know what? We didn't talk about this. Okay. I know. Yeah. So I remember now, Joey. So thanks for bringing that up. Because I did actually talk about that on a previous live stream. Just kind of casually. We talked about, I think this was when we were talking about Curve Optimizer on AMD. But yeah, so this is a good point that he's bringing up. So let's talk about that briefly. So on a clock cycle, so if we say this is one period of time, right, the rising, let me use two different colors. So the rising and the falling of a clock pulse, right? So if this is one clock cycle, this is one interval of time, you have a, in terms of the bits, you have a 0. Here you have a 1. Here you have a 0. Oh, and I guess, okay, you know what? I think I probably messed this up. Let's draw this out a little bit more. Let's do 2 pulses. So if we have a 0, a 1, a 0, and a 1, if this is the pattern in one interval, one clock cycle. So what he's saying, now I think I'm starting to understand. Now I'm remembering the reason now. So what DDR5? So okay, let's talk about DDR4. So DDR4, you could send one command per clock cycle. So if this was one, if we cut this in half and say this is one, well, you know what? Let's just say this is literally one clock cycle. Or actually, no, you know what? Let's just cut it in half. So if this interval of time is one cycle, and then this one over here is another cycle, you know, this 0 and this 1, this would be one command, and this is another one command. So what DDR5 allows you to do versus DDR4 is you can encode two commands, or effectively send two commands via the IMC to the memory in one clock cycle. So you could basically send two commands encoded in that one interval of time in both. So that's DDR5. So that's the difference between DDR5 and DDR4 in terms of how much kind of the commands that it can send. So it's kind of like, think of DDR5, and this is the reason why command rate doesn't really factor into DDR5 anymore. Command rate is typically going to be 2T most of the time. Like, in order to do 1T, the IMC has to be really, really fast, or it has to be like very, very robust in order to handle something like that. So I guess, you know, maybe AMD's IMC is really, really strong. I don't know, but I think it's an architectural difference ultimately, because there is that fabric clock that doesn't really run above 2 gigahertz. So, and the IMC is kind of bolted onto that to some capacity. Yeah. So the thing is, with DDR4, you got to remember, with DDR4, you can run DDR4 in Gear 1 or Gear 2. Gear 1 and Gear 2 in DDR4 is basically 1T versus 2T in the command rate. The testing you've done with AMD, you're in the low 90s, or low 50s. Can we isolate what's the real issue that is limiting AMD? I think it's the F-clock. But we would have to look at the, like, we'd have to really know, we would have to look at how the F-clock and the U-clock are interrelated, because I think that's going to be a lot of it. But it is interesting, you know, that technically AMD is actually doing Gear 1 mode. As long as the U-clock is under 3000, or it's 3000 or lower. Because what's different here is, in the DDR4 world for Ryzen, the F-clock, U-clock, and MEM-clock all were trying to sustain a synchronous ratio of 1 to 1 to 1. That doesn't really come into play with DDR5. Yeah, at least from what I've seen. Like, typically, F-clock is just going to be 2000 megahertz, and that's just going to be what it is, and you don't really mess with it. It just always is that. And then U-clock and MEM-clock are the ones that are going to be 1 to 1 until you hit like 3 gigahertz. Once you go 3 gigahertz, like, the U-clock can't really do anything. Like, it can't really go above 3000 and be stable. So I think that's part of it. But I think the latency, to answer your question with the latency, it's probably just going to be because it's a chiplet architecture versus a monolithic architecture, if I had to guess. And the F-clock is part of that, because the F-clock is basically the uncore clock. And the U-clock is the IMC clock. So you have some differences there. I did not really think of it that way. You know, that's an interesting thing, that comment about the AMD IMC is a lot stronger. I don't know if that is the case. It's certainly a lot faster than the Intel one in terms of just the pure frequency. But, you know, the latency would suggest otherwise. So there are some other things in that architecture, I think, that are responsible for the higher latency. But AMD in general, like, the memory latency has always been higher than Intel. Even going as far back as, like, Zen 1. Like, when AMD didn't use chiplets, it was always higher. And I remember when PC Perspective did that article about, like, they discovered the pings, but I think maybe that was Threadripper. That might have been Threadripper. Oh no, it was the core complex die. So, like, back when AMD, like, before Zen 2, you know, they had the CCX. So they had like half of the cores were over here, and then the other half were like over here. And you know, you had 4 cores. You had like one here, one here, one here, and one here, and likewise you had 4 over here. Remember that? I don't know if you guys are familiar with the original Ryzen architecture. So this was basically what an 1800X looked like the die on an 1800X. There was 2 what they called CCX, core complexes, and then you had the cache and all the other stuff that was what was like in the middle here. You had these interconnects between them. And I remember, I think it was PC Perspective did an article. They discovered that if the RAM, like, if a core, like let's say this core right here had stuff that it needed to send, like, to memory, it would go talk to the memory. But then if the I forget exactly what the scenario was that they described, but essentially if it had to ping pong across the CCX, it was slower than if it was like localized to one CCX. Yeah. They had unified to 8-core. Yes. Yeah. That was the big change from Zen 2 to Zen 3. So Zen 2, they still had this design. Yeah, they still had this design, but they did like the dual chiplet thing, and then Zen 3 was when they put like 8 cores in one CCX or something like that, or it became like a CCD, core complex die, as opposed to core complex. Yeah, so I just think it's like a difference in how their architecture is. So, but the thing is, like, what I don't remember is, I want to say, like, off the top of my head, if I'm trying to recall what the latency was like on the first generation. I want to say it was like 90 something nanoseconds, like 95 nanoseconds or something. Maybe it was like 100 something, 110 nanoseconds was the worst case if it had to ping pong across the CCXs. But if it was like on the same CCX, then the latency was something, you know, like 50 or 43 or some number that you would normally see on like an Intel processor. That's what I remember. So, yeah, but we're talking more about like memory. So, yeah, good point though. Like, technically the IMC on AMD is running a lot faster than Intel for the same memory kit, but it's, you know, the latency number still isn't great. So those are just some like key architectural differences there that I don't know, like, if they'll be able to change that with a newer generation of the CPU, like with Zen 5 or something. But the bottom line is, like, if you're just trying to run 64 gigabytes of DDR5 at like 5600 or 6000, typically that's doable, regardless of which CPU brand you're using. And then with 13th gen, you know, you could potentially go higher. But the thing is, like, the higher density you go, then it reels back in those speed advantages on the RAM. So, all right. Well, I think I answered most of the questions that people had earlier on, and I don't know if those people are still here. So, running 64 gigabyte kit, wouldn't AMD win? That's a really good question. At the same speed, probably, but that would, yeah, that's a interesting. 4x16. 4x16. Well, it would probably be 2 by 32 is what I'm thinking. AMD's IMC would be higher than Intel at 6000. Yeah, it would. So Joey's already able to test that though, or he's already tested that. Yeah, I need to be able to get my memory to run at 6,000. My 64 gig kit. I can't get my 64 gig kit to run at 6,000 because it's not a 6,000 kit. So it's like a 5600 kit. I got to figure out the right sub timings that are going to be stable. So I guess no. Like what he's saying is, if you're running both of them at 6,000 with the same memory kit, is the AMD one better? Like, and I guess what he means is like the memory bandwidth and versus latency. Intel at 6,000 can't do as low latency as AMD at 6,000. I'm not sure about that because I think I don't know. I don't have the numbers, so I can't really comment on that. Are you currently on the latest F8C bio? F8C? Yes, I am. You're considering Aorus Master over Asus Hero, and stability is important to me. Yeah, I'm on the F8C BIOS. It's stable. Like, what's wrong with the Hero? The Hero is more money, I'll tell you that. The Hero's like $200 more than the Aorus Master. Like, I personally, like, there's only one motherboard that I would consider at the price at $700, and that would be the MSI Meg Ace. The MSI Meg Ace is like the most expensive AMD motherboard that I would actually recommend to people. Anything at that price point doesn't make any sense if it's anything else. So like all the Asus stuff that's priced that high is way too expensive for what they give you. So like in my mind, Asus at like $700, and then with the $1,000 Crosshair Extreme, they're just selling on brand name and like LEDs on their motherboard, and it's like, yeah, that's not. It's like it's style over function, and it's like no. The Hero has less usable PCIe slots because my 4090 blocks most of the Hero. I can tell you the Master doesn't have any issues with a 4-slot graphics card. So I'm running a Power Color Red Devil 7900 XTX, and that is a quad slot card, so it's just as thick as the 4090. And I don't have any issues. I can use both of my lower PCIe slots. In fact, I have an unboxing. I suggest you should check out my 7900 XTX Red Devil unboxing video, and then look at the part in the second half of the video where I show how to install the graphics card, and you can clearly see how the Master, how the PCIe slots are laid out. I have a Thunderbolt 4 card installed in my Aorus Master motherboard, and it fits perfectly fine with the massive 4-slot GPU above it. And there's still enough space for the fan to get air. For me, the Hero has less, but yeah. So like the Hero, okay, the way I look at it is the reason why the Hero has less usable slots is because Asus gives you USB 4. They give you Thunderbolt 4. That's the only reason why. Like, they could have done it in a different way, because I'll tell you right now, the Crosshair Extreme at $1,000 does give you an X4 expansion slot at the bottom, and it also gives you USB 4, aka Thunderbolt 4. The Gigabyte card. So like with Gigabyte, you just have to install the Gigabyte Maple Ridge, and I did that, and I can tell you right now, like, it works totally fine. I have full PCIe tunneling support, so PCI Express tunneling works. I mean, I can show you it right now. Hold on, let me pull it up, because this will be pretty interesting, I think. How do I share it? I don't know if this is gonna let me share this. Okay, here, check this out. So you can see right here, I don't know how clear it is. Oh, whoops. So let me show you right here. So check this out. You can kind of see it. Let me move it. Let me make it a little bit larger. So this is my Thunderbolt control center on my AMD AM5 motherboard running full Thunderbolt. I have an AverMedia Live Gamer Bolt. This is an external 4K 60 capture card that supports HDR. So I can capture HDR off of a PlayStation 5 or another PC if I want to do like dual stream or whatever. And I can show you, what I want to show you guys is manage approved devices? No. About? So you can see right here the details. Application version, controller driver version, PCIe tunneling. This is the big thing. So there's another really good YouTube channel, although he hasn't been able to upload videos recently due to some tough times. But I can tell you, like this was something that was asked on the Build or Buy YouTube channel. Be sure to check out that channel. It's really, really good. If you're someone who's looking for like content creation, very, very thorough channel in terms of the details on motherboards and their capabilities. But this is a really good feature though. This tells me that I can do PCIe tunneling on an AMD motherboard for Thunderbolt 4. Thunderbolt, so you can see Thunderbolt 4, number of ports 2. I have the security turn off because it's whatever, I don't need it. The firmware version. So there you go. Full Thunderbolt on AMD. And it works totally fine, no issues. The 4090 should fit in here just fine, though. So, here, let me go back to the... Okay, wait, why is it still... What happened here? Oh, every time I unshare and reshare, it messes up the size of that window. I have to resize it. There we go. Anyway. So, yeah, but that's that's the reason why. I will say, like, if you are interested in Thunderbolt, then you might want to ignore what I said earlier about MSI, because MSI is the only one that does not support Thunderbolt on the new AM5 platform. That's the only negative thing I've found about MSI. So it's like Gigabyte lets you put the add-in card. ASRock, same deal. You can put the add-in card in. Although ASRock also does give you Thunderbolt 4 on their Tai-Chi, which is a $500 motherboard. But if you want to add Thunderbolt to like their Steel Legend, it's there. And then Asus gives you Thunderbolt on the Crosshair Hero, the Crosshair Extreme, and the ProArt Creator. Those are the three. And then if you want to add Thunderbolt on Asus, again, just like with ASRock and Gigabyte, they do give you the option to add the add-in card. But you would need an X4 PCIe slot. That's at least PCI Gen 3. Those are the requirements for Thunderbolt, for the add-in card. Okay, so Joey said, I've been having issues with the new BIOS in DDR5. I've had to stay with the older BIOS on my Intel Master. Okay. Really? I gotta look into that. I honestly, I have not messed with my Intel motherboard. I know it's on a newer BIOS. I don't remember which one. I don't know if it's the latest one or if it's like one of the the ones from November or something. Oh, I'm sure they will. They all will, because the thing is, the X3D CPUs are too new. They're not gonna launch with like newer motherboards. They're just gonna launch and then like BIOS updates will come out to support them. Next month. So they might even be coming out now. In fact, I suspect that the Agisa 1004 BIOSes, when those come out later this month, those will add support for the X3D CPUs. That way, when the next batch of motherboards arrive at retailers like Newegg, etc., then if someone were to buy an X3D CPU on launch day, and if they don't already have a motherboard because they're just now going to AM5, that batch of motherboards that shipped to the or to the retailers with AGISA 1004, those will probably already have day one support for the X3D CPUs. So the X3D CPUs have already been done for like 2 months, from what I know, but which is crazy because I was originally thinking that we were going to see those in May, which means that they would have been done like sometime in February, but the fact is they actually were done like a few months ago, which is crazy to me, but okay, whatever. Because that means like they had these things just sitting around. Well, not sitting around, but like they were obviously like with the X3D, you can't overclock the die that has the V-cache on top of it. So that's probably going to be hard to implement in the BIOS if someone wants to overclock. I don't even know if it's going to let them overclock the CPU at all, but in theory, you can get PBO running on the other non-V-cache CCD. So yeah, Joey, I mean, I haven't really decided, like, which one I want to get. like, I don't know if I want to get the, what is it, the 7950 X3D or the 7900 X3D. I don't know yet, because, or maybe even just, like, the single CCD. I don't think the single CCD one can be overclocked at all, though. I think it's going to be just like the 5800X 3D. But the other two are different because those have one that has Vcache and one that doesn't, and I assume that they'll let you tweak the PBO and the curve optimizer for the CCD that doesn't have the Vcache, but I don't think they'll let you do that for the one that does. So I guess the reason why these Vcache CPUs took longer to arrive is because they've had to like the BIOS has to be more specific in implementation, so that it doesn't ruin if someone goes and turns curve optimizer on and it accidentally like overclocks the Vcache one and then it kills the Vcache on top of it, that could be a problem. So that's probably why it took longer to get those out the gate. I do find that it's interesting that those are going to be lower power, and that's probably because of the Vcache. Do you think the Vcache CCD on the core? So the one with the Vcache is probably I don't know. That's a good question. If I had to guess, probably 5 gigahertz. Because what was the other one? Like, what was the 5800 again? It was like 4.7 or something, or 4.4. So where is that other one at? Hold on. Was it this guy? Okay, yeah. So up to 4.5. Up to 4.5. So do they have the specs on the other one? Up to 5. Okay, so it's probably gonna be 5. The one that has the Vcache isn't gonna go above 5. Do you think the Vcache CCD? Oh yeah, we talked about that. And it's for reliability, so that the Vcache doesn't burn up and deteriorate. That would make sense. Honestly, yes. They should put it on the lesser bin to die. That would totally make sense. Like, logically, that is the optimal thing to do from a manufacturing standpoint. So, because that still allows Silicon Lottery to play a role in it, assuming you can overclock the non Vcache CCD. Like in a typical 7950 non 3D, you get a good yeah. Like SP 111 versus 120. I don't know. I don't even know if it's if there's a way to determine the bin of the single CCD. Although, you know what? I kind of think there is, because I remember, like, with the current ones, typically there's a CCD that has cores that run slightly faster than the other CCD. So naturally, the same approach would be applied to the 3D CPUs. Yeah, I'll probably... I don't know. I haven't decided, like, which one I'll get. Because, honestly, like... So my use case isn't so much for gaming when it comes to using a 16-core CPU. So, for me, like, if I was going to get one of the dual CCD ones, like the 7950X3D or the 7900X3D, like... I would have to I would have to look at, like, the reviews to determine, like, is the performance uplift in gaming worth it? Because, like, I will game on the PC, but I primarily use a 16-core CPU as a prosumer high-end desktop. So, like, what would have been a Threadripper is like an old Threadripper 2950X, for example. That's what I would use the 7950X for. Or that's currently what I use it for. So, like, is the X3D worth it? Like, I don't know. Like, for gaming, this one definitely makes sense for... I can see this working for a lot of people. And honestly, for gaming, the average person who just wants to build a gaming CPU, they want top-level performance, and they don't want to have to waste time, like, undervolting, overclocking, etc. Like, this is probably going to be gaming CPU of the year. Most likely, like, the power consumption on this is going to be, like, way less than a 13900 KS. So, and gaming performance is probably going to be, like, you know, chart topping right there. So, yeah, and you don't have to tweak it, and it's, like, less power than the non-3D, like a 120 TDP. So it's like, yeah, this one's probably going to be, like, a bestseller, just like how the 5800X3D is going to, was. And you don't have to tweak it, you don't have to do any sort of tweaks to control temperatures. So it's like, yeah, this one's going to be really good. So this is one of those, like, if I was going to recommend to somebody who's on a really, really old, ancient DDR3 Haswell, Devil's Canyon, or AMD FX 8350, or something older, Sandy Bridge, Ivy Bridge, this would be the go-to. Like, this is the CPU that I'd point them to and say, get this, get a B650 motherboard, and you're pretty much set. And if you live near a Microsoft, now I don't know if the free memory is still going to be a thing when these come out. If it is, like, it'll sell out probably in like one day. So if they're near a Micro Center and if that free G-Skill 6000 RAM is still available, this is going to sell a lot, like, in the first couple of days. Yeah, it will be interesting to see, but I'm pretty sure, like, if you remember with the dual CCD, like the 7950X, the CCDs already are kind of binned. Like, one of them typically has your better cores than the other one. So it's the same approach. Like, you know, they'll just throw the Vcache on the lesser CCD. It makes sense. And in terms of the voltage, yeah, I mean, maybe, I mean, it makes sense if the higher bin one has the lower voltage. But the thing is, like, the lesser bin one, it doesn't mean that the lesser bin one will be at a higher voltage. Because the lesser bin one won't clock as high. You know, won't go above 5 gigahertz. So, you know, I think that's all there is to it. So it won't need as much voltage because it's not going to go as high anyway. So, but it will be interesting to see. I think that, you know, to be honest, like, I'll be honest with you guys. I did not expect a dual CCD V-cache CPU to launch in February, let alone launch at all this year. Like I was telling people, like, before AMD's reveal at CES, because I did the reaction video. Like, some people tuned into my channel when I was watching the Lisa Su, you know, CES keynote address, and I gave my reactions. And, like, I was telling people before any of the announcements, like, I expect them to show off the 7800X3D. I even called it 7800X3D, and it's a single CCD 8 core with the V-cache, and I said it was probably going to come out in April or May. And then when she revealed February, and then when she revealed that there was like 3 different SKUs, and 2 of them have dual CCD, I was like, wait, what? What? Like, completely, like, went beyond my expectations. Maxed out 50, 53, nanosecond verse. You know, I don't know. But I do think, like, it's just going to depend on the use case. I think in gaming, the 3D is going to win. Now, will it win all the time? Probably not. Because if you were to take AMD's numbers, what they showed, like, how much faster the 7800X3D is versus the 5800X3D, in some cases, in the worst cases where it was only like 5 to 15% faster, that's not going to be faster than the 13900K. Because the 13900K in those games where, well, it depends on the game. Like, I might be wrong because I didn't go back and cross-examine like what the 13th gen and what AMD 7000 does in those games. But like for games like Counter-Strike and games where AMD was already ahead, like, this is just going to be even further ahead. And then in games where the 5800X3D was already beating like all the other CPUs, this one's just going to even more beat the other CPUs. Now, what I don't know is if those games where the 5800X3D was like out in front of everyone else, is that the games where this CPU is only 5% faster than an X3D Zen 3 CPU? I don't know. What I will tell you is that if you're somebody who plays Star Citizen, hands down, like, these CPUs are going to be the best CPUs for Star Citizen, because the 5800X3D currently is the best CPU for that unoptimized game. And this is like well-known fact. Like, it's better to run a 5800X3D than any of the other CPUs. The 5800X3D in Star Citizen is better than the Zen 4 CPUs, and it's better than 13th gen and 12th gen. Like, just saying. So I can only imagine, like, this one is going to be even better. So, but that's just one game. But that is a very good worst-case scenario example of a game that is severely CPU bottlenecked. You can play DCS Flight Sim VR with a 3D killer on Bally. Yes. Yeah, like badly optimized flight sims. This is going to be amazing. So, yeah, so pretty much like my recommendations for like people that I know that are going to be building or upgrading this year, this one on screen is probably going to be the go-to choice. Like, this is going to be the de facto, like, just get one of these and don't think about it sort of CPUs. For people who don't care about overclocking, undervolting, etc., they just want something that's really fast and can play games with very, very good a 1% lows, like, yeah, just get one of these and don't even think about it. And then for those that like to tweak or they want or they need more multi-thread, like prosumer, high-end desktop sort of thing, then that's where the Ryzen 9 3D V-Cache comes into play. So, because the thing with the V-Cache is the V-Cache CPUs, they kind of compensate for the higher latency on the memory too, is one thing I've noticed. So very interesting CPU. And the thing is, I've always said, like, the X670 and the B650 platform, to me, seems like a very good platform, longevity-wise. So, you know, one of these with a X670 or X670E, that's good for, like, 5 years. I mean, and then the thing is, like, by the time this socket is, quote-unquote, a dead socket, there'll still be the option to upgrade to whatever the last supported CPU is on that motherboard. So it's like even though there'll be something on some new socket, it'll be the same story, like with the way the 5800X3E is today, where a lot of people last year opted to just buy a 5800X3 and upgrade off of their first, second, or third gen Ryzen CPU and just stuck with one of those and kept DDR4 and didn't worry about it. So we got a super chat. Produced to gain. Best white RGB DDR5. Probably the... So, I know G-Skill has... So, it depends. Like, do you want the... Oh, he said RGB. So, I personally like the Trident Z5s. So, I like these, but I know Team Force has some good ones. Corsair also has some good ones, but I like these. I like these myself. These, I've seen these in person. I don't have the white ones, but if I was doing the white build, I'd probably go with these. Like right next to the AIO, I think that would look good. You get the Dominator. Yeah, the Dominator, so, it depends on what you like. Like, if you like a continuous light bar, then you would go with this. If you like the kind of dot lights, I'll show you the Dominator Platinum. So we'll go look at these. If you like this, you know how these lights, what I mean by dots are, see how it's like individual kind of lights here on the top like that? Because, yeah, the side is there too, but really what you're going to be looking at when you actually look at the build is the top of the RAM. Like, if you like the spotlights like this, where it's like one individual like squares like that, and the logo where it says Dominator, then yeah, like that's good. But I personally like the more wavy look on the Trident Z5 myself. So these look really good. I've seen the Dominators at like Micro Center. I've never owned like this type of like Dominator memory, and I don't know anybody that has the Dominator. I've seen these at Micro Center though, and they do look good. But I personally like the look of like the light bar as opposed to the dot lights. You like the A-Data and Corsair Vengeance look? Oh yeah, the Vengeance, yeah. The Vengeance does have the light bar like the Trident Z. The other thing too with the Corsair Vengeance is I think those like they have they're not as tall. They're more low profile than see like right here. They are still kind of tall. They're not like low profile. But they're not as tall as a Dominator is what I'm trying to say. So like if we look here, see like right here. So what I mean by that is if you have an air cooler, although if you're going for RGB, you're probably using an AIO or some custom loop or something. So yeah, like this is typically... See, the reason why I still like the Trident Z more is because with this, it's literally like 4 lines or 4 light bars. But with the Trident Z, now I don't think G-Skill, do they have like a... See, like G-Skill, because of the way they have like this extra aluminum, kind of like an aluminum blade sticking up asymmetrically, I just think this looks really, really good. Like, these just look really good. That's just, I mean, this is not bad, but it's like I just think you asked my opinion. Like Vengeance is good, but I personally think the Trident Z looks nicer. Joey's saying G-Skill for performance. I mean, yeah, G-Skill typically, like, you don't have to guess too much if you're getting Hynix M die or Hynix A die for the high-speed DDR5. But, like I was saying earlier, if you understand the timing, like if you look at the primary timing and then like the other two timings, you can pretty much guess if it's Samsung or Hynix, regardless of who's the reseller on the RAM. Yeah, no problem, man. But like, if it was me, I would go with the Trident Z5. And the other thing too is not only do you get like the nice light bar, but you're typically gonna get Hynix M die or Hynix A die with this particular kit, like Trident Z5 or Trident Z5 Neo. So, it depends on what, like if you're talking DDR5, Hynix is better. Not always though. So usually, if you're going for very, very high speed RAM, then that's where Hynix actually matters. But if you're going for RAM that's like, if you're only aiming for like 6,000 megahertz RAM, and you just want to set it and forget it, then you can get Samsung memory and it'll be fine. Hynix is better if you plan to overclock the RAM though. So. But it depends. Like, if you're trying to save money on the RAM and you really... Because honestly, like we were talking about this earlier, there's not a whole lot of benefit going above 6,000, 6,400 because the latency factor comes into play. And the thing is, like, with Intel, you're running in Gear 2 mode anyway. And then with AMD, you want to maintain that 1-to-1 ratio... because everything needs to be in balance. Like, it has to be in its Zen form, right? So, that's just another thing to keep in mind. So I wouldn't sweat it too much, like, on the high speed. I'll just put it this way. Like, 6,000 is kind of the sweet spot. You can go up to 6,400 on both, and it's still slightly better, but then it becomes... You get into the realm of diminishing returns at that point, where it's like... when you're above 6,400, it's like, is there really a perceivable difference here in performance? Probably not. So, yeah. But definitely, yeah, go for... I like what you're thinking. Like, go for the aesthetics and then try to figure out, like, what's the good sweet spot in terms of the speed. And that would be it. Yeah, because like these, like for instance right here, if you guys look at all of these, all of the ones that are shown here, except for this one, these are all Hynix except for this one in the corner. I can tell you right now, like this one, 6,000 J3 36 F1 6 or F16. This one is Samsung memory. I can tell you this right here is Samsung. The other ones are all Hynix. This is Hynix. This middle one's Hynix. This left one is Hynix. This is Hynix. This is Hynix. This is like better bin Hynix right here. And then this is 1.4 volts. This is definitely Hynix though. And then this is Hynix as well. All these are Hynix except for this one. So you can tell by the timings. And we already went over that earlier. Anyone know about the release dates for white 4090s? I know a few have been announced, but haven't seen release date. I thought Palette had one already. I just don't know. Like, I don't know where you are globally, but I think Palette had one, or maybe Galax had one. One of those two. I don't know about PNY. I'm pretty sure PNY didn't have one, but I think Palette had one. Had a white 4090. Asus, I'm trying to think if they had one. I don't think so. MSI has the Supreme, it's the silver one. You're in the US? Yeah, so I don't think, like, I'm in the US too, and I don't think we got the palette model yet. But yeah, there is one. It's just not, I don't know, like, supply with the 4090 is just up in the air right now. It's like, they're so low in supply, regardless of what NVIDIA says. I never see them in stock. Like, Micro Center, the Micro Center that I'm nearby, like, that I live near, it doesn't have any. Best Buy never has them either. And Best Buy is the only place to get the FE, and it's never got them. So, yeah, I don't know. Newegg gets them randomly, and then they're gone instantly because bots are constantly sniping them. There's a Strix White. Really? Because the Strix that I know of, the Strix 4090 that I know of is a giant solid brick with the Captain America color scheme. I don't know what Asus was thinking with the Strix this time around. It's a solid rectangular brick. This looks like Captain America. Oh dear lord, look at those scalper. Oh, that's from Australia. Oh man. Oh, it's happening again. This just looks like they thought like the artist that works at Asus was like, what should I draw? Like give me some like inspiration. Give me some like keywords when I craft this card. And I bet someone in the back of the room said Captain America, and they ran with it because it's just, I don't know why, like, or maybe Superman, maybe like the blue and the red, like at an angle, maybe it's like Superman's chest or something. Like, I don't know what they were thinking, like Batman versus Superman, whatever. Like, I don't know, like this is a nice card. Where it fails is the fact that it puts 2 fingers instead of 3 fingers, where everybody else decided to put triple finger right here. Asus like failed epically with that. So yeah, good luck not running into sag issues with this after like a year. This is definitely a card that requires a support bracket because they went with 2 fingers instead of 3 fingers. So that's just fail on Asus's part, and that's why I'll never consider this card if I was going to get one of these 4090s. Because I don't want to have to buy a card that absolutely requires that I use a support bracket. But this is one that does require a support bracket. It's not optional in my mind. It is a mandatory requirement. Colorful Galax Zotac. Oh, real? I thought Palette had one. Like, didn't Palette have one? There we go. The Game Rock. Oh, well, maybe it's not white. Wait. Oh, never mind. That's 3090. What am I talking about? I typed 4090 and it didn't find it. I know the silver one, but that's not white. Yeah, see, this is the problem. They're like in such short supply, it's so hard to track these things down. Wait, what's this? AX Gaming? I don't even know who these people are. What is this? It's just like someone just was like, hey, let's put the D-pads from the PlayStation on here and call it a 4090. What does the side look like? Oh, it's some it's some like, but look, this is what's funny. Like, some random like no name whatever decides to make a 4090, and some rando makes a 4090 and remembers to put 3 fingers, but Asus doesn't remember to put 3 fingers. What is this? Like, some rando made a 4090 and actually put the 3 fingers, like I said, so it won't sag. I don't know who is this. Like, who made this? GeForce it's like it's anonymous. It's somebody submit a random 4090 to Newegg. Wait, what's the... So it's got three displays and what... Oh, okay, that's like standard. Triple finger, just like the reference card. So they're doing it right. Like, okay, there's the, you know, the infamous cable, and it's like everything's there, but wow, okay. It's a Chinese brand. I don't know what that says. It's upside down. Something about electricity. I mean, I can read some of this. Like, okay, hold up. It's upside down, so it's gonna be hard for me to read. But basically, the first symbol is like something about power or energy, and then that's like cosmos, sky, something, and then I don't know what the third one is. So it's like powerful, galactic power, some nonsense, whatever. That's what it's saying in Chinese, but it's like I don't know what the brand is, because that's not the brand. That's like the gaming brand of it, not the... Okay, it says AX Gaming. Way to rip off Gigabyte with their AX Elite. Hilarious. Man. You know what's funny? Like, I think we talked about this on a previous stream. Like, there's a Chinese startup company that made the very first PCI Gen 5 graphics card. And here I was thinking AMD was going to make the 7900 series GPU be the world's first PCI Gen 5. Then not only do they not announce it's Gen 5, they say it's Gen 4, but then like literally like 2 days later, some Chinese company announces the world's first PCI Gen 5 GPU. The 3-finger master race. Yeah. Yeah, it's gotta have the 3 fingers. Like for me, like I told people this on the stream. Like back when the 4090 was launching and we were analyzing the different AIB coolers. Like I literally said on that stream, like there's a couple of requirements. One, it has to be quiet. Two, it has to be it has to have the 3 fingers so it doesn't sag after like 2 months. And then like if I don't put a support bracket on it. And then like the third one was probably like the IO. Like it has to have, you know, at least the 3 display ports. If it has like dual display and dual HDMI, or, you know, that's not really nice. But I mean, I'll be okay. But it's like I have to really like the brand for me to consider to buying a GPU that has like dual HDMI and dual DisplayPort, because it's like I don't like when they do that. Like Asus went and did something like that, but then Asus did put another, like they still kept 3 displays, but then they put like another HDMI on there, which was okay. But then they screwed up and made it a 2-finger, and I was like, oh, facepalm moment right there. So yeah, like in my opinion, like the Zotac one actually looks really good. And they don't screw up. Like they did it right. Like triple finger, you know, it looks like a sports shoe. It looks like a sneaker or something. But you know, it looks actually pretty good. I like it. I actually like the way the Zotac one looks. Don't really like this adapter, but everybody has to do it. Everybody has to sell you their little poisonous adapter there. But I've already done a video on like power supply upgrades for this, so that's not really a problem if it was me. And then yeah. You know, packaging is pretty standard stuff. So this one is pretty good. Not gonna lie, that's a good one. I would consider that one. I know it's not white. So it wouldn't go with... Well, this is actually kind of neutral, right? Like this, except this RGB, which you could probably change the color on there. Like, this would actually look pretty good. I think this would look pretty good. So, just too bad, like, you can't actually buy one direct from Newegg, and it's like, yeah, no, I'm not paying that kind of money. So, kind of out of reach for most people. They announced showed a white of that Zotac. Oh, really? Oh, it was at CES? Yeah, you know what, I think I remember seeing a picture of it on, like, Twitter or something. Or like some news feed from CES. I'm pretty sure I saw a couple of them. But I don't know why, like, palette like sticks out in my mind as already having one. It's just we're not seeing all the ones on Newegg just because of the shortage of these. So I don't know, maybe Micro Center has more of them. Just, well, I don't know, like they're gonna all be out of stock, but I thought I saw one somewhere. Okay, well maybe not. Because these are all the same ones. Really? Okay. Well, you missed most of it. This stream was all about memory, DDR5 memory specifically. Like, we talked about things to watch out for, things to be aware of if you're new to DDR5. And if, regardless of whether you're looking at AMD for DDR5 upgrade or Intel for DDR5. So we covered both in depth. That was pretty much the vast majority of the stream. And now, I don't know, now we're just kind of just talking, like, whatever comes up. In the 6 local stores close to you, there's over 35 4090s. Wow. What brands? You're in Vancouver. What are the different brands that you see out of those 35? Because I'm always curious to know, like, one thing that has always intrigued me is the supply based off of the region. So, like, for example, Canada. I mean, North America, Canada, and the US typically get the same brands, but I wouldn't be surprised if, like, Canada gets more of you know, like, Zotac and Gigabyte, and America gets more like PNY and MSI, but then both get, like, Asus, you know, whatever. I'm just curious about those sort of things. Oh yeah, because I remember, Kevin, you had commented like way earlier on in the stream. What PSU would you recommend for 4090? Something that has the cable. Something that has the cable. Like, I already did a video. I did a video on a power supply that I upgraded to that has the 4090 cable native. So I would get the MSI. Now I know, like, there'll probably be more options, but the MSI Meg, or actually MPG 1000i, this one, and excuse me because if I cough a lot, because I do have a cold. Like, if you guys watched the last video that I uploaded, I sounded kind of off in that video, and that's because I have been sick for the last 2 or 3 days. I'm starting to feel a little bit better, but I have had a lot of, like, congestion and issues. So I'm trying to drink a lot of fluids so I don't, so my throat doesn't dry out and, you know, I don't start coughing too much. But we're probably going to end the stream soon here because I need to go to sleep so that I can recover faster. But yeah, this is one that I would definitely recommend. If you want higher wattage, there's the MEG, or there's the Meg A1300i. Wait, what was this one? MSI Meg A1300 IP or something like that, or P? I don't remember the name. Why is it not showing up? 1300p. Okay, well, it's maybe Newegg. Okay, well, okay, yeah, this one. Wow, that's expensive. This is one. This is kind of like one that if money is no option, and obviously if you're looking at a 4090. You know, I would obviously recommend a PCI 5 spec power supply because it does include the very high power connector there. So this one or that other one. Like there's two. So there's this one, which is the 1000 watt. So this is going to be a lot more affordable. And then there's like this other one, which is like really expensive though. Those are the two that I know of. I did a video on this one in particular. So the Meg AI 1300p. And that is actually the PSU that I'm using on this computer that I'm live streaming with. So I'm using the PSU right now. And I've had it for a couple of months. I think somebody left a comment on that video asking, I probably need to respond to that comment. I did see a comment, they were asking, like, now that I've had it for a few months, do I recommend it? And the answer is yes. I have not had any issues with it at all. And I'm running a 7900 XTX Red Devil with a AMD 7950X, and I don't have any issues. 1000 watts should be enough. Yeah, it should be. Like, the thing is, like, when I went to get one of these from Micro Center, like, they didn't have them. But they did have the more expensive one, so I ended up buying the more expensive one. That's happened to me a lot last year. Like, I go to Micro Center, and I have a specific budget, and then, like, every time I go there, I've always ended up spending, like, more money than I originally wanted to spend. Except for the case when I bought the AMD motherboard. So, like, on the launch day of the 7950X, so when I bought this CPU, the Ryzen 9 7950X, you know, I was originally going to buy a $700 motherboard, the MSI Meg Ace, but they didn't have it, so I had to buy an Aorus Master, and that was like $500. So I ended up saving $200 right there. Like, that was the only time, though, that I actually walked out of a Micro Center and didn't spend, and I actually spent less than what I originally thought I was going to spend. Every other time last year that I went in there, like, I ended up spending more. Well, or what I expected to spend. Bottom line is, if you live near a Micro Center and you're a PC enthusiast, your wallet will hate you. Your wallet will hate you. Yeah, I think Joey beat me too. I think Joey got the ace. So I wasn't able to get one. And I mean, I tried to get one, like, later on, but then, because I know MSI had the rebate, but at that point, like, you know, like, more things started launching, and I just moved on at that point and never had to revisit it. And then, like, the Gigabyte board that I have, I've never had any issues with it, so it works. I was able to add Thunderbolt to it, and that works fine. You know, there's no reason for me to go to the MSI board now. So, all right. Well, I think we kind of covered the major theme of the stream here, which was primarily the memory discussion. So we talked about all that stuff, just to kind of reiterate, but we're going to end the stream soon. But bottom line is, if you're looking to go to DDR5, regardless of whether you're going to go to AMD or Intel, if you're going to go to AM5, and if you're going to get the X3D CPUs that are coming out next month, or if you're just going to build a workstation and get a 7950X or a 13900K or whatever, bottom line is you can pretty much aim for like DDR5 6000, and that'll work regardless of whether it's on AMD or Intel. And then if you want to go higher, like 6400 or higher, then just know that if you're on AMD, your U-clock is going to have to run at half the mem clock, so you're effectively going to run in what Intel calls Gear 2 mode. And then Intel, you're pretty much always running in Gear 2 mode, so that doesn't really apply there. And then I think the other thing that I wanted to say was, if you're curious to know, if you look at RAM and you want to know and guess if it's Hynix or Samsung, if the first number is equal to the second number, so for example, if the cast latency is 36 and 36, then that's Samsung memory. There's a high chance it's Samsung memory. And if it's like two different numbers, so like 30, cast latency 30, and then the second number will be 36, they're different numbers, that's Hynix memory. So that's kind of how to look at RAM and determine if it's Samsung or Hynix memory. Got a super chat. So thanks for all the help. Yeah, I mean, no problem. Like, if you have any questions, feel free to check out any of the videos that I did on a lot of this sort of content. I know I did a lot of live streams that are kind of free form like this, which I probably will look at condensing some of the sections on these videos. I try to put timestamps in post on the live content so that if there's a certain topic like memory, for instance, we can highlight that so that it's easier to go back to a previous stream and look at that. But, you know, feel free to check out some of the other, like the actual video uploads, not the live streams, but the videos, because I think there's a lot of content there that's specific to, like, the video cards, for example. I did, like, a build video for the 13th generation Intel CPU. Recently I built an AMD AM5 CPU, so I did cover both. Like, the socket installation, the CPU installation is very, very similar now that they're both LGA. It's just one of them opens the other way. Like, Intel opens, like, the latch goes up, the bracket goes down. AMD, it's the other way around. The latch goes down, or the bar goes down, the latch goes up. You know, those are the sort of, like, differences, but they're still essentially the same installation method. Only Best Buy. Yeah, well, I mean, Best Buy is where to get a 4090 from, in my mind. Like, Micro Center is really where the AMD cards are at. Although, I don't know, Best Buy's weird when it comes to AMD cards. Like, they have XFX, and they'll randomly have reference, but it's online only. And, like, NVIDIA, like, Best Buy's the only game in town if you want to buy, like, a Founders Edition NVIDIA card. You can't get those from anywhere else. Like, the only time you can get a Founders Edition NVIDIA card from Newegg or from Micro Center is if they get them from Disty. Basically, they have to buy them, like, from a supplier that typically would get them and like, procure them to Best Buy. But if Best Buy overbooked on, like, 4090s for whatever reason, I'm just using that, this is an example, then, like, that distributor could, on the back end, sell some of those to Micro Center or Newegg, and that's usually how Micro Center ends up getting them. But yeah, typically Best Buy's the only one though for Founders Edition. So, alright guys, well, I hope you guys found this stream informative, because, I mean, it was interesting. I do want to do some more, like, separate videos talking about memory, but I need to first figure out, like, how to get my 5600 kit to do 6000 reliably without having to go out and buy, like, another set of memory, because I really don't want to do that. So, alright, well, that said, I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Thanks.